when I started my business, no one wanted it, right? No one was like, you want to come do what? Have like bring creativity and play into the workplace? Like, we don't have time for that.
Lai-DuMone is the CEO and founder of Work Smart Advantage and the author of What If Pigs Can Fly? Work Smart Advantage is a progressive team development and leadership training consultancy that utilizes creativity, play, and experiential learning to evolve mindset, skill sets, and behaviors in the workplace.
I came here at the age of 2 at the fall of Saigon. As a child, I grew up as an American kid, growing up in a Vietnamese household. I was always groomed that this is just the way you do things. You go to college and then you go get a master's degree, becoming a lawyer or becoming a doctor. When you live for someone else's identity of you, this is what happens. Let this be a lesson. The first job I found was in education.
So what were those experiences for you sort of during that time that kind of pushed you to the next era of your career development?
My brother, who was a police officer at the time, got into a motorcycle accident. And when we got to the hospital, the chance of survival was slim to none. So he actually recovered and went back to being a police officer, like literally a miracle. So it was things that happened like that was when things really shifted for me. And I had known that this job was not the right fit for me. I knew I wanted to do something creative. My choice was to start this business, bringing creativity and creative thinking, creative problem solving into the workplace, a lot because I felt like I was missing in my workplace. We're actually applying the skills and tools of creativity and play for business outcomes. How do we use these playful tools and methodologies to actually solve challenges and strategize in the workplace?
All right, welcome to another episode of Built for This Stories of a Maverick podcast. I'm excited to welcome Lai-DuMone today. We're going to get into her story as the founder of Work Smart Advantage, which is a leadership training company that integrates creativity and curiosity into the workplace. Also, two of my favorite words. We're going to talk about her story growing up, her authorship, her TEDx talk, all the things that make her the person she is today. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Jen. I'm happy to be here.
Amazing. Well, as I said, we're going to talk about all things in terms of your journey. So I always love to start kind of where everything begins in terms of family life, whether it's chosen or biological. It definitely is the piece that kind of shapes us as we start to look at things going forward. So I'd love to hear from you sort of what growing up was like for you and kind of the influences your family had on you growing up.
Oh, well, that is quite the story. I am a Vietnamese refugee and I came here at the age of 2 at the fall of Saigon. So April 29th, 1975 is when we fled Vietnam. As I said, I was 2 years old at the time. And this year is actually the 50th anniversary of that date. So it's a really significant year. I've been doing a lot of research and study on that time. And because, as a child, I grew up as an American kid, growing up in a Vietnamese household. So there was definitely a stark difference between what was going on in my home and then what was going on outside of the home. So our journey started, we lived on the Air Force base in South Vietnam, and my dad was a lieutenant colonel in the South Vietnamese Air Force. And on the day Saigon fell, it was time to evacuate any way we could. And we ended up leaving on an airplane out of the airport by a miraculous story because they had bombed all the runways, but we were able to get out. And we ended up in the United States, and our first home here was at Camp Pendleton Marine Base in San Diego. We stayed there for about 2 or 3 months and then transferred to a refugee camp up in Northern California called Hope Village. And that was a civilian-run organization. And it was there where, that group was like, well, we need to not just house these people. We need to help them find careers and get them sponsors so they can get off and, go live somewhere and really become independent as quickly as possible. So one of the stories from that camp was that my mom ended up being one of the first 20 licensed Vietnamese manicures in the United States because of a story that happened at that camp. And it was this chance meeting with Hollywood movie star Tippi Hedren, who was a volunteer at the camp. And her role was to help the women find a career for themselves. So Tippi started this typing and the sewing class, and 20 women signed up, including my mom. And as they typed and sewed, Tippi would walk around the room, encouraging them. And as she did so, these women noticed something that caught their curiosity and was Tippi's long red manicured nails. And imagine being Tippi Hedren, Hollywood movie star. She could have completely ignored that curiosity, but she didn't. She paused and she paid attention. And that led them down this path of taking these small steps to getting, first her manicurists came up from Los Angeles and taught them how to do a basic manicure. Then they went down to the local beauty school. And despite not having money to pay tuition, despite not speaking English, the beauty school said yes and enrolled them into school. And from there, they became the first 20 licensed manicurists in the United States.
That's wild. That's super cool.
Yeah, so that was like, and then that was our beginnings, right? I remember like, I think by the time we moved to Santa Monica, as we were sponsored by a church in Santa Monica, Tippy came and drove my mom around until she found her first job as a manicurist. And those were where my first memories started of, my mom and my dad working hard. So when you say about like this idea of like we are formed by our life experiences, I mean, it's from my parents I learned to work hard, right? Learn work ethic, work hard, family first. And I share that in their words, they always led me to go to school, get a graduate degree, get a job, work hard, and then one day you can have fun, right? But when I realized, in my 40s, I finally started my own business, doing something I love. And, in this work now, I look at it and they're like, oh, like even though those were the words they said to me, clearly I learned something else. Right. Clearly, from their actions and what I saw them do every day, what I learned was to be creative and follow curiosity.
Yeah. And I'm curious, kind of having a bit of that immigrant story. I mean, one of my close friends is Vietnamese. Her parents came over via boat, a little bit of a different, more experience from a trauma perspective. And growing up, when she was kind of like one of in a high school full of white kids, her parents didn't speak the language, which was tough. And then kind of a very strict household based on them trying to kind of build something. And I realized, kind of coming out of an Air Force dynamic, being able to fly in, I guess I'm curious if any of those experiences shaped how they showed up for you in moments of like toughness, or kind of, what if there was a big culture shift for you to digest, kind of coming into the United States and it being something totally different than, granted, being little and maybe not remembering everything, but maybe even like your parents struggling from that perspective.
Certainly a cultural shift for them. For me, it's all I knew, right? I was 2 years old, so by the time I had any type of ability to be cognizant, I was an American child, right? I was in school, in preschool, even in daycare at an early age, 'cause my parents had to work right away. So I remember going to a daycare just right down the street from the apartment we lived in. But for my parents, definitely it was rough, right? Imagine like literally being dropped into a completely different culture in an instant. It wasn't like they prepared. It wasn't like they said, let's make this choice to leave our country and our culture." It was they were forced, but in a very grateful way, right? Like, thank goodness we were able to come to the United States. So, yes, I definitely saw my parents struggle with one thing that was fortunate is they both knew English. My mom was an English teacher. My dad worked with the US Air Force. They both spoke English. So that made it a little bit easier in terms of language barrier. But the way we live here and the way families are run in the United States, for the most part, is very different than the cultural norms of a patriarchal Vietnamese culture.
Yeah.
And it was, in hindsight, I see how much of a struggle it was for my dad, particularly, both of them. But there's so much to talk about. If you think about my dad, I now work with veterans transitioning from military to civilian careers. And we're talking about like Navy SEALs, Marine Raiders. Like these guys were men and women actually, 20, 26, 30-year careers, and they're leaving. And think about like a 26, 30-year career of a Navy SEAL, what they have seen in the last 20 years. And for them to go through and transition with support, with this amazing program they're part of, and still say, this is the toughest thing I've ever done, really made me reflect on what was my dad's experience, right? He was Lieutenant Colonel in the South Vietnamese Air Force, pulled out of his role, pulled out of his identity, pulled out of his homeland, and having to start over. My mom talks about when we were up in Hope Village, he was one of those people that stood out. I mean, I don't know if there were Home Depots at the time, but he was one of those men who stood out in front of whatever Home Depot was at that time looking for work.
Yeah.
Where 3 months earlier, he was commanding, a crew of people in the US, I mean, in the Air Force. So a lot of challenges for him in terms of identity.
And were you able to have any conversations with him or ask him questions, or were your parents kind of quite reserved about those experiences and kept them tight to the chest?
Yes. Yeah. It was interesting. It was never a situation where any of us felt we could ask questions, but every now and then he would just emote, right? It was like at these family meetings. It's funny, I can joke about it, but really when you think about it, like this is like the way I raised my child is so different than the way I was raised. Because I clearly remember we would have these family meetings. I don't know if you had family meetings or what your family meetings look like, but my family meetings look like I would imagine how my dad ran a briefing in the Air Force, right? Everyone gathered. I'm going to speak at you, and then you're going to leave and do what I told you to do. Right. But in some of these briefings, family briefings, he would tell stories about what he went through and the loss he had. And he would cry and we would cry along with him. But it wasn't ever like, oh, now can we ask some questions? It was, now we're going to buck up and go on our way. And it was hard for us to take that in, the stories in and see it for what it was, because it was always, how can I put this? Like, it was always in a way that he wanted us to know that these are lessons he wanted us to learn, right? Like, it wasn't him trying to share with us. It was like, you have it really good. Here's what I went through. So I find it hard to talk about because I don't want to paint a picture of my dad being someone who's just wanted to blame and shame us. But that to a small child is how it came across.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's probably an element of, him trying to instill that toughness, right? Of like, this is how bad it could be. This is what I did. And so, really, what I'm trying to do is build resilience and toughness in you, but it's not necessarily the ideal way in which a child wants to experience those things for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so you mentioned kind of, your parents being able to get access to some really interesting situations, your mom having kind of the story that I think is very unique and very not many people can say in terms of the nail side of things, and an opening to kind of build her own stability in a way and kind of pique a curiosity. So as you saw, obviously parents that had a really strong work ethic coming out of a tough situation where they had little to no control of the reasons they were leaving their home country. But, again, as you mentioned, that gratitude to be able to get out of that situation. How did it kind of evolve for you in terms of, education or sort of the field you started to want to lean into because of those experiences?
For the longest time, like I said, well into my 40s, it wasn't about what I wanted. I literally, like, it was, and I think a lot of kids grow up like this. It was, following a path that was designed for us. Right. So growing up, it wasn't, I think about, like, was it a choice to go to, was it a choice to go to Catholic school? No. Was it a choice to go to an all girls high school, Catholic high school? No. Was it a choice to go
Interesting.
to college? Where I went, it was a choice, but I was always groomed that this is just the way you do things. You get straight A's, through elementary school, high school, and then you go to college. Whether or not you know what you want to do with your life or not, you go to college and then you go get a master's degree, preferably in engineering, becoming a lawyer or becoming a doctor, and then you get a career, and then we can all brag about you. Like, and I'm just speaking from, like, this is what it felt like. And I would have to say anyone who is of Vietnamese descent and is a refugee and a first or second generation, they understand this,
I
and
hear
other
that story
refugees
very
probably too.
often, like the dentist, doctor, lawyer, like these are
Yeah.
your options, go.
Yes, exactly. And in hindsight, it was like, it's what they knew, right? It's what they knew. It's like, okay, if we came to this country, what we see is that education gets you far. And what's the most stable thing that you can become? A doctor, an engineer, a lawyer. So all my life, I tried the best I could to follow that path. Okay, I got straight A's in school, in elementary school, close to straight A's in high school, applied to college, the UC system for colleges, went to UC Santa Barbara, not knowing. I look back and I'm like, what a waste of money. It was, like, so much fun, but I had no idea. I'm like, okay, I started as a biology major because let's become a doctor.
Yep,
And then I flunked OChem twice. So I'm like, okay, we're going to study psychology instead,
yep,
not thinking I was going to become a psychologist. Like, I had no idea. I was like, I'm here.
yep.
I have to study something. So it's going to be psychology. And then after that, again, just following the path of what can I do next to, and it was very subconscious, right? What can I do next to make myself look good? What can I do next to make my family look good? So then it was all over the place. After school, after I left UC Santa Barbara, I came back here, thought I was going to become a chiropractor or a physical therapist. So I went back to City College and took all my science classes, applied to chiropractic school. And this is where it's like, when you live for someone else's identity of you, this is what happens. Let this be a lesson.
I
So
love it. It's never a straight line. Like,
let this be a lesson. So then I was going to go to chiropractic school or become a physical therapist. I worked for a physical therapist. I worked for a chiropractor after college. And I went back and took all my prerequisites. And I got accepted to chiropractic school. And then before I went, I was listening to the radio on the way home from work. And it said something about, there was an advertisement for Pepperdine's MBA. And I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll do that instead. Because if go to chiropractic school, I'm a chiropractor, right? But if I go to get my MBA, well, I can be many other things. And I'll still have a really nice degree to show my parents. So I did. I think 2 or 3 weeks later, I went and took, is it the GMAT that you have to get into MBA? I forgot. I don't know.
I'm not sure, but there is something. Yeah.
There's a test, right? So I took that test. I got in. I went to Pepperdine and got my MBA. Again, not knowing what I wanted to do with it, but I knew it was going to get me that next degree.
Yeah. And where I'm curious along the way as you're kind of zigzagging between different ideas, are your parents calling you being like, what are you doing? Like, you need to choose a path and stick to it? Or were they okay as long as you were in school?
Well, they didn't need to call me because I lived at home. So,
Right. Yeah.
yeah. So I think as long as I think they probably had their hesitations, but it was always like, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go join the circus. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm going to become a chiropractor. I'm going to become a physical therapist. Oh, no, not that. I'm going to go become my MBA now.
Yeah.
Right. So it was always like good enough pivot that still met standards.
Right. So you get your MBA, and then what happens?
And then again, I'm like, what do I do with this MBA? Right. So I'm like, why did I get this thing? What am I doing? So I just start looking for jobs. And the first job I found was in education. In, I guess, I don't know how you would put it, like corporate education. It was for elementary school kids. It was a company owned by the Washington Post called SCORE Educational Centers. So I went and worked for them. They had regional centers all over the place. I quickly became promoted and moved to San Diego and ran their region down there. So it was these retail, I mean, you can't have these anymore because they wouldn't even exist. There were these retail locations where kids would come after school. Everyone had their own computer system and it was basically tutoring on these computers and it would adapt to their skill level. So I went to San Diego. At the time in San Diego, there were 4 retail locations, and we ended up opening 4 more while I was down there as the regional manager. And I think maybe this is when I started being like, I don't like, what am I doing here? This is not like, I really don't feel like I chose into this. And in the meantime, I had interned at Body Glove, the surfwear company
Yeah.
from the 80s. I had interned there during my MBA, and the VP of sales had called me. He's like, hey, we licensed the name Body Glove for women's activewear division. Would you like to come up and be the COO of this company? I was like, 27 years old. I'm like, I defined I don't like it here. And oh yeah, by the way, my parents would love to say that I'm the CEO of a company, right?
Yeah, like, this seems like a good plan for me.
Yes. So I moved back to LA and I ended up working at that startup for about 3 years. It wasn't even that long. I don't even know if it lasted that long, but that was a mess.
Yeah.
Right? Because like knowing what I do now, right? Bring creativity and curiosity into the workplace to like, I am not a COO.
I know, it's like an interesting transition. I'm like,
Yeah.
from learning and development to like come in corporate and be a COO of like a
major brand
fashion label.
Yes, exactly, in the fashion industry. Yeah, so that I think that was probably my first pivot where I was like, okay, I'm stepping into new territory here. And it got rocky. Like I think that was the point where I was like, okay, this is no longer anywhere near the path that was designed for me. So in that rockiness, I think that's where, I mean, it was almost like it was a hard time, but I also think it shook my foundation enough. I'm like, okay, let me try different things.
Yeah. And I think in terms of sort of those moments for you, what were kind of I'll call it, when you talk about pivots or adversity, I always think there's some interesting moments. And usually it happens with work and personal life kind of end up sort of combusting in some kind of way. And you either sort of, I'll call it, somewhat fall into like a victim spiral of these things are all happening to me and why me, or this is my chance to kind of make a decision for myself because this clearly is not what I want, or it's not working, or perhaps this is not what I'm supposed to be doing. So kind of what were those experiences for you sort of during that time that kind of pushed you to the next era of your career kind of development?
Oh, that's so, oh, now I have to go way back to remember this. So I think that, I mean, I can think of like a couple bad breakups, right? Like for relationship breakups during that time. And it's interesting because like relationship breakups, work breakups, I internalize a lot of them back then. Right. I didn't have a very strong identity. I didn't have a strong sense of self because clearly, as you've already heard, growing up, I was like, okay, who can I please? Who can I make look good? How do I make myself look good? So I don't think well into my 20s that I had a very strong, or even into my 30s, had a strong sense of self. It was more of like, how can I please the people around me? So when there were these career failures, these relationship failures, I did often fall into these moments of like, woe is me, right? But it wasn't like, how come that happened to me? It was like, how did I create this?
Right.
So there was still an ownership around it. It was like, okay, what, like, not why did this happen, but like, why did I create this for myself? And I think it was in those moments where I'm like, but it was always like, it's this idea of like, you fail, but it's the picking yourself up that matters. And I always pick myself up. And I think that resilience came from my parents too, right? Even if it was subconscious, like, okay, if they could start a whole new life in a whole new country after losing absolutely everything, am I really gonna let this breakup with this guy
You
slow
know?
me down? Right?
We always have that when we look back and we see them later and you're like, how did I ever let myself get so heartbroken by
Absolutely, 100%. And you look back like, okay, there was a reason for it, right? There was a reason that happened, and I'm glad it did. Made me stronger. In all those moments of quote unquote failure, if you allow yourself to, you can learn lessons and dig deep, find some value in it.
Yeah. And so kind of maybe it was there sort of a tool or sort of I know you talked about kind of, sort of the get back up each time, but is there any kind of tools you picked up along the way where it kind of like then it clicked and you're like, this is it. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And things started to fit together and you could recognize it to kind of even lean into that more?
I'm gonna have to fast forward to kind of to get to that. So I think that what led me from kind of bouncing around all sorts of places. So the last place I bounced to before I started this business was, so I bounced around a lot, right? Like I was like a consultant, I did sales, I did talent, like leadership development in a company. So I did a lot of things. I opened a ballet bar studio, right? So it was during my very last pivot before I started this company was I worked for a large pharmaceutical company. And I started as sales and did sales training. And it was during that time I also opened this ballet bar studio because why not? Why not just do it all? Right. And again, it was one of those things, the ballet bar studio was like, I took 3 classes with a friend of mine who also worked at this company. We're like, we should start a studio. And that idea just turned into like, okay, what's the first step? Okay, let's see who will license to us. We found a company with license to us. We're like, okay, well, let me just write a business plan and see if the bank will give me money.
Yeah.
Bank gave us money. Right. So anyway, so we can get into more into that if you want to later. But I was doing that. I was working in this pharmaceutical company. And then I got married fairly quickly. I was dating someone for about a year. We got engaged, got married, bought a house, had a baby. And when my son was 8 weeks old, my brother, who was a police officer at the time, got into a motorcycle accident. And it was a head-on collision with a tree.
Oh,
And he was airlifted to UCLA Medical Center. And when we got to the hospital, they're like, chance of survival is slim to none. And he's in an induced coma. So he was in the neuro ICU in an induced coma for almost 2 months.
wow.
And we had no idea. Like we would hear things like, okay, well, now we think he's blind,
Right.
right? Or like he may not survive until tomorrow, or we think he's paralyzed now. You didn't know when someone's in induced coma, you cannot tell. He, thank goodness, is fine.
Oh, wow.
Right. Yeah.
Amazing. I
He
was like
actually,
prepared for kind of the
yeah, like tell me something
right?
good here.
Yeah.
So he actually, recovered and went back to being a police officer. He's now retired, but like literally a miracle. So it was when you say like things that happen, like that was when things really shifted for me. I had known that this job was not the right fit for me. It was a great company, great people I worked with. I'm like, why is everyone else so happy? like, I don't like it here, right? It was not for me. So it was during that time where I finally was like, okay, like I've had this idea to start this business in my head for 6 years. And I've had this fear of starting, and now it's time to start. Yeah.
And it's funny because when you talk about it's not the right fit from like the clients I work with, I'm doing a lot of talent acquisition, people and culture development. And, when you're learning about people's background and how people identify that it wasn't a right fit for them. And sometimes it's not necessarily, it's not what they want to be doing, but I'm curious what was happening. Was it just that you were looking around and everybody seemed really happy with their jobs? Or what was kind of, I almost call like the somatic feeling where you're like, this is not it? If I stay here any longer, like, because some people don't listen to that feeling
Yeah.
and they stay in that job for the rest of their lives and they're
Yes.
miserable.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that goes for a lot of things in life, marriages, careers. And I don't know what it was. I think maybe there are other people who are unhappy or other people who are just like, okay, this is, I enjoy making a lot of money, right? And I enjoy, like, it's fairly easy. I don't work that many hours. I enjoy talking to the doctors and being around people and, training people on sales. I can't explain it. It was just like, I'm dying inside, right? There's something missing here.
Yeah.
And for me, it was this ever since a little kid, I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I knew I wanted to do something creative.
Yeah.
But again, growing up as a Vietnamese refugee, like you can have creativity as a hobby, right? But that's not a career. So I think that just kind of came to the surface for me of this is, you know, I know I should be doing something else, and I kinda know what it is because I made it up in my head 6 years ago, and it stayed with me for the last 6 years. I just haven't taken action on it.
Yeah, and I think it's too sometimes when you start to get clearer on what your values are. I know for me, I never wanted to go to my own. I always thought I would be a really great number two. And in a lot of cases for entrepreneurs, because those are all my clients, I am that, but I'm in control of how that looks. But the moment of realizing like this is not it was definitely a values moment where you kind of go head to head and you have that choice. Like you were saying, I could stay in this role, I could make great money, I'll continue to probably make even more money, but I am going to be miserable with my life.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
alternative of, like, I'd rather just not have any cash coming in and I'll figure something out was a much more attractive option than staying there and knowing, like, having that emptiness inside.
Yes, absolutely, and I think a couple things added to that. I have to be very clear, like, first of all, I think the life events of having a little boy, this tiny little boy, this like so tiny, like 8-week-old child who I would literally just carry to the ICU every day. Right. Every day we were just in there walking around the hospital, walking outside the hospital, walking around Westwood. And there's this no like, well, I want him to see his mom setting an example of doing what she loves. And then seeing my brother at the time, like not knowing what's going to happen, saying things like, okay, this is like life is short. I've known I need to make a change. And if these are not clear signs to make that change, I don't know what is going to be a clear sign. And I do have to say that this idea of, and it kind of plays into my business too. I was married and my husband had a full-time job. So I had the luxury, I guess I was, and it's not like we weren't making tons of, he's not making tons of money, but like I had the luxury of saying, okay, we can at least like, tone down our lifestyle, which wasn't extravagant anyway, but we can live off your salary while I start this business.
We have some choices that we can make so this can happen, yeah.
Yes. And, my choice was to start this business, bringing creativity and creative thinking, creative problem solving into the workplace. A lot because I felt like that was missing in my workplace, right? I didn't feel like I had a voice. I didn't feel like my ideas were heard. I didn't feel like I felt comfortable sharing ideas, and I didn't feel like I had any type of creativity. And so I left to start this. And then in hindsight, I realized like, well, what's interesting is I started this business, bringing creativity to the workplace, and I had the luxury of leaving. And I wonder if the work I'm doing now will prevent some people from having to leave. Right? It's like if I had this sense of belonging, the sense of creativity, the sense of my ideas mattered in the workplace, for those people who don't have that luxury of leaving, like maybe that will be enough, right? Maybe having like creating that environment in the workplace will be satisfying for them.
And I love the word play because I always say, especially given with entrepreneurs, I'm like, what's play in your schedule? Like if you're so back to back and you're driving so hard and, you know, entrepreneurs have amazing gifts, whether it's their visionary, like ability to see something that nobody else can see exist, like a relentless work ethic,
Yeah.
or maybe it's like negotiating. Sometimes it's like a lot for people to handle and they need a little bit of a buffer, but they can almost, in my experience, outwork everybody and they won't stop till it happens because every ounce of their being is in making whatever it is they're up to. And I think along the way, especially in growth mode, you are trying to move as fast as possible. You are sometimes, depending if you're in a niche tech space or if you're in an AI startup space, like time is not your friend because you're in a high competitive situation. So, how do you work with those people to bring play into, I'll call it a schedule that doesn't have time for play?
And when you say that, and as you're describing this person, my thought was like, oh, and then imagine being a refugee entrepreneur, right? where now we're dealing with like the sense of lack or the work
You hear
ethic.
your parents' voice in the background, like, no,
That's
no,
right, that's
yeah,
right. It's like, "No, no,
more,
no. We're
no.
not sitting, we're going, we're doing." And what I like to talk about is this idea that when I started my business, no one wanted it, right? No one's like, "You wanna come do what? Have like, bring creativity and play into the workplace?" Like, we don't have time for that. So, I almost look at it as, well, at least when I first started my business, idea of, like, tricking people into it. So, for example, I used to do well, I still do, but so I bring creative activities into the workplace, including this idea of, like, painting rocks.
Yeah.
And I used to call these like creative art projects. Okay, we'll do this training and development, and then we're going to do a creative art project at the end. And people are like, well, we'll take the training and development, but we don't need the creative art project. So, like when I bring these, and this is what people remember, right? This is what people hold on to is their artifact. So I'm like, oh, that's it. I'm going to change the name of it. It's called a creative artifact now. Right. So we're going to do this training and development. Oh, and by the way, we're going to incorporate a creative artifact. And people are like, oh, that sounds amazing. We definitely need a creative artifact. And you're still painting a rock.
But it's sometimes it's language matters, and it's that little
Yes,
piece where like, "Oh, I get it, yes." Mhm.
yes. And when I talk about creativity and play, in environments and situations like that, I really have to gauge the way I need to talk about creativity and play because some places I can just go in and bring creativity, bring play. And some environments I have to talk about the value of creativity and play. And I have to talk about this idea of we're not doing creativity and play to be creative and be playful. We're not using it as something to get away from work. We're actually applying the skills and tools of creativity and play for business outcomes, right? Like creative problem solving. How do we think creatively? How do we use these playful tools and methodologies to actually solve challenges and strategize in the workplace?
And I'm curious too, in terms of kind of educating people at that, like I think about instantly what comes up is like full participation. I can see executives like, oh yeah, yeah, my team should absolutely do that, but like I got stuff to do. So, and I think like a couple clients come to mind where I think of like I don't have time for that. Oh yeah, they need it, but I don't need it. Or like I would love to play and be creative, but I have bigger problems to solve right now. So in terms of kind of, I guess, those roadblocks, or if we are, communicating to those people right now, what is kind of maybe the way that you approach or rework that to get their heads thinking in a bit of a different way to realize how much that will impact one, their culture, but also their productivity?
I think for me, the way I've designed my work really starts at the top. So, because I realized, like, you can't teach creative thinking, creative leadership in middle management and below. You really have to teach it at the top and then it can trickle down because it's hard for someone from, I don't, let's say middle management, like, oh, I have a great idea. Let's incorporate creativity into, how we do our strategy meeting. I'm going to bring in this facilitator who does Lego series play. So the way I've structured my offerings is around the highest level of leadership, learning first about the mindset, skill sets, tools of being a creative leader. And if I can get in at that level and share that, then we can bring the work throughout the company. I think it literally is like just telling people. And I've had to get good at this. I used to be really intimidated by everyone.
Of course.
So,
Natural when you
so
start, you're like, I think I have it, but also, what if I don't have it?
That's right. So I've had to get really good at letting people know, like, the part of the process is that everyone participates. Right. Like, and one of the tools I use, Lego Serious Play, like that is like, I guess you can say like a primary rule of Lego Serious Play is everyone builds, everyone shares, everyone participates. Because the idea of creativity and play is what we're trying to do is level the playing field so that you can really get all voices to the table.
I love it.
And it's hard to do if someone's sitting in the background going like, "What are you guys up to?" I'm not participating. I wanna see what you guys are up to.
Yeah, and I find too in a lot of and outside of kind of your approach with facilitators is they sort of kind of let the founder get away with what they want to get away with and not participate or like selectively participate versus kind of calling them out and again like leveling that playing field. And I think it's so interesting in cultures to sort of see that breakdown where you have groups of people who really don't see any difference between their boss and them of that their voice has value versus other people depending on where they've come from, different experiences. There is really that big gap of I can't talk to that person or I can't go into their office even though they might have the right idea to do it. And then it's unfortunate to see sort of where the breakdown happens in cultures and teams is because there is no level set, or you can try, but it really takes that kind of instance or like bonding in some way to say like, okay, you're not this big scary individual who's going to fire me if I set up a meeting to come in and say I have an idea and I think it'll fix this.
Yeah, absolutely. I find and I don't know, maybe it's because of I do really believe in this idea of like attracting, right? Attracting your clients, attracting the right people in your life because I have come across leaders, founders like that, but rarely. I mean, I've been running this business for 10 years. I can only literally clearly think of one founder that I have experienced that with. And I think it's because early on in this, this entrepreneurship journey is I decided like I'm not struggling, right, with that. I'm not struggling to try to find people who don't want to be found.
Right.
Right? I wanted just like the people who understand the value of creativity, who hear my message and is like, that sounds interesting. Those are the people I'm going to work with. And with the concept of like, and if enough of those people work with me, then these other people will start hearing about the value of creativity in the workplace and then they'll start reaching out.
Yeah, the domino effect
Yes.
of that happening. And then so how did the book come about?
So this book, so right back here, What If Pigs Can Fly? A Practical Guide to Follow Your Curiosities. So the book idea was something I've had in my head, just like the business. I had this idea in my head for 6 years. The book was in my head for 4 years. Owning a business, people will say, you should write a book. You should write a book. I'm like, okay, I should write a book. And it just sat there for years. And I knew it was going to be called What If Pigs Can Fly. It was going to be around curiosity. And I knew it was going to be more like a book and a workbook. And I think random, like a paragraph here and there for over 4 years. And then I was at a speaking engagement that my friend Janine Leffert put together. And there's another speaker there named Eric Severson. And he said to me, you should write a book. I said, well, people have told me that. He's like, well, I actually edit and help people publish books. And he lives here in El Segundo, not very far from me. And, I'm a firm believer too, in like, I like to work with people who I don't know, I just feel a connection with and I like. He had great energy. I had been approached by several people about helping me write a book, and it would never dawn on me to even start with them.
Yeah.
So with Eric, felt different. I'm like, well, let's meet for coffee and talk about it. So we met over coffee, and he just like, okay, well, just send me chapter 1 by next week. And of course, this Catholic school girl was like, oh, is that an assignment? Like,
Got this, no
yeah,
problem.
you need it Wednesday, you'll have it Monday. So so that's how it started. So I sent him my first chapter. He wrote back. He's like, it could use a story here, maybe a quote here. And we just did that for 3, 4 months. And then it became a book, right? He walked me through the publishing process. He published it through his publishing company called Thin Leaf Press. And, and again, like looking back, I'm like, yes, I came up with the idea 4 years before I wrote the book. But it came about at the right time because by the time I wrote this book, I had more stories to share. I had a full framework. Before I was like, oh, follow your curiosity because like it's a cool thing to do and you'll find fun things. But by the time I wrote this book, I'm like, oh, like I had developed this whole framework around how to follow your curiosity. A simple framework, but it's still a framework. The first thing is, and it stems from my mom's story, right? What did Tippy do? She paused and she paid attention to an idea, the curiosities that were sitting in front of her. They took small steps and they asked like the what if questions. Well, what if we could? Rather than saying no, right? Because I feel like a lot of us, we have these curiosities, we hear them tapping us on the shoulder, and then we say to ourselves, oh, I can't because, right? So rather than doing that, how do we pause and ask the what if questions or the how might we questions to find possibilities in that curiosity? And then the third step is literally just taking one small step and not even thinking about what the next step is or not ever even think about the end goal. Just like, okay, take that first step and see what doors open up for you. And it almost is like serendipity, magic. It's worked for me so many times in my life where I now just like, I'm like, okay, I'm curious about this. My small step is to, like, what if I could talk on a TEDx stage, right? That was one of the things I did where I was like, okay, I was on LinkedIn one day. I saw someone was posting about they were producing a LinkedIn talk. I mean, a TEDx talk, and they had all their speakers. So of course, in my head, I'm like, oh, I'm curious I could speak on that stage. But I saw they had all their speakers, so I bought a ticket to attend, and I walked away from my computer. And that tapping on the shoulder, well, you like, what if you could speak on that stage, Vaughn? So I went back and, what if I could? Well, the small step I took was just write an email saying, here's the story I want to share, which was my mom's story, and this framework on like this curiosity framework. I'd love to share it on your stage. I know it's booked, but Just throwing it out there. And they wrote back and said yes.
I love it. I always tell people, like, you don't know unless you ask. And if it's maybe you get a no the first time, but then it's, but here's what we can do for right now, and it can evolve. And then by the time sometimes those things happen, you're in a way better place to be like, actually, it's going to be way better now.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. And it's a muscle you have to build because first, it can be hard to
Yeah,
take
you
that
get like
small
the
step.
sinking the butterflies a little bit because it instantly comes up is that like that fear, possible shame, rejection. Nobody loves getting told like no, or then you internalize and you're like, it must be because I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
It's not the
Right.
truth, but
Yeah.
like instantly that like inner voice comes in and it's like, I told you not to do it. Like,
That's right. And that's why I feel like it's like you have to build that muscle because the more you do it, you realize there's been so many times I've reached out to someone or taken that step. And I'm like, I didn't hear for, I heard a no or I didn't hear back from them, whatever it is. And then you internalize it. And then 2, 3, 4 months later, you get a call back. Right. Or so it's like it's the more you do it, the more you see it does work in your favor.
yeah, and even like the funniest ones now, like I just laugh things off if they kind of don't like work out, or you're like, oh, interesting, that definitely wasn't meant to happen. Because sometimes you get a response that feels what I call so misaligned with actually who you are that you get, you're like, no, that was a good, I'm glad they said no. I kind of thought it was going to be this way, but actually the reality of it is much different. And then I
Yeah.
always kind of like think that's like the universe's way of like, maybe not this way, but like maybe you should zag this way instead.
Yes. And I've really had, I mean, especially as an entrepreneur, hearing no's a lot. You have to, I've really taken on this mindset or this feeling of like, okay, things don't happen to you, they happen for you. Right. So maybe that no is going to actually keep you open for something bigger.
And in terms of kind of curiosities, let's talk about cows and stained glass.
I love where this conversation is going.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm like stained glass. I do remember because we did get to make some glass
Yes, we did.
together,
Yeah.
and I do like very intentionally give those glass hearts out to people and tell them the story. And everyone's like, "You made this? How do you cut glass?" And I was like, "Great question."
Yeah, I've got the scars to show you. I got these things.
Yeah, but I would love to hear sort of kind of where that curiosity came up and tell me everything about cows first.
Okay, so cows are stained glass first.
We'll
Which
go
one do you want to hear
cows
about?
first and then into stained glass.
Okay, so there's I heard something years ago where it's like, and I don't even know where it is. I probably like read on a fortune cookie, but it's this idea that the truth always stays with you, right? Something about like it's true is always there, and what's always been there for me from childhood is the idea of like living on a farm, like I live in Los Angeles, and
I was like,
now that I
double
think
wings for a farm, yeah.
right? I live in like Mar Vista, Marina Del Rey area. Like,
Okay.
there's no farmlands around here, but there is just something that's like, what would it be like, Vun, to live on a farm and have more space? And one time I told people I want to live on a farm, they're like, oh, what animals are you going to butcher? I'm like, no, I'm sorry, we're not butchering any animals. It's more like a mini animal farm,
Yeah.
right? So the way I envision it is just like a ranch style home, 1 story, nice ranch style home with grass as far as you can see, and it's building now. I'm like thinking, oh, I get the archway is going to be the what if pigs can fly farms, right? I see mini cows there, mini Highland cows, mini donkeys, mini horses, mini pigs. Are there mini pigs?
Mini
Mini goats,
everything, yeah.
mini goats, and like this idea just building, and then like that can be the way we can have a petting zoo for the mini animals, and then this thing. So anyway, that is like the vision,
Okay.
and it's becoming more and more clear to me too. I'm like on a 3-year plan to be on this farm,
Okay, and have you
and
already looked at, like, where it's gonna be
oh,
located?
okay, so that is where I'm gonna start reaching out to people soon. Well, let's just do it now. I was on a call with someone the other day, and the last question I asked was, "Where would you suggest?" I'm like, I'm gonna end all my calls with what, like, where would if, here's my dream. Where would you suggest I go look for a farm? So he gave me 2 ideas. So do you have any ideas for me?
I do because one of my former clients and friends bought a goat farm, and you can actually it's amazing, it's called Surfing Goat Dairy Farm in Maui, and
Oh,
I was
nice.
there with my family in March for my mom's birthday, and we got to go check it out, and you get
Uh-huh.
to cuddle baby goats, you can go milk goats if you'd like, and do a tour, and then they set up a little shop where they've now made, like, chocolates with goat milk and, like, different baked goods, you can, like, sit up
I
and
love
overlook
it.
the property. I didn't know what I expected, no expectations showing up. I was like, I don't know, like a goat farm, like
That's right.
and then with this like beautiful driveway and his like second mountain. He looks so happy, and he grew
I'm
up
gonna
on
look
a
it up.
farm when he was little, but like wanted to escape it, get away from it. And then, come into his or like mid 50s is want to go back to farming in a different way. And it was super cool to see him in his element and like a different level of happiness. And also Maui is not a bad location.
No, Mal, I had not even thought, and like this idea of like that's why I love to talk to people. Like it's opening up possibilities for me because right now I'm thinking like in terms of like how much do I want to pay for this farm? So I'm thinking of areas like somewhere in Georgia and Tennessee because I think about like my budget if I had moved right now. But I was like, wait, no, like let's open our minds. Like, yeah, Maui's a possibility, right? Ojai is a possibility. And like this idea of like not letting your current reality limit your possibilities. So thank you for that suggestion of Maui. Yeah, so yeah, and another friend of mine sent me a link on Instagram to this woman who and this is a friend of mine who I knew in college. And in college I had started doing oh my god, like mosaics, ceramic mosaics. Like I would go get furniture
We
for
both
garage
had a
sale.
crafts project at
Oh
one
yeah.
point that was mosaic-esque
Yeah.
based.
So lots of mosaics. So she sent me this Instagram post where this woman had done her whole backyard in mosaics. And she said, you should do this on your farm and charge people to come and tour. I'm like, I love the idea of having this whole mosaic area. So lots of ideas coming my way, but the stained glass part. So we know each other through our beautiful, amazing friend Nancy Gale, who brought us together through that heart making stained glass class, which we put together. And the way I got to that stained glass class, did she share that story with you?
No, so I was coming to LA and I was going to be staying with her, and she's like, "Oh, well, you're actually like, I'm
That's
going
right.
to invite you to this stained glass thing. Do you want to come?" Like, I have no idea what that is, but yes.
Yes, I love that you did. It was so much fun. Okay, so I'm going to tell this story, and it's going to give maybe a little too much insight into my psyche, but whatever.
I
So,
love it. Yeah.
so I had a friend. I have a friend. His mom had passed away. And he had sent out a post that said, like, I walked out, I saw a rainbow, right? So I'm like, that would be so beautiful to give him something like rather than flowers that reminds him of his mom. So I got on Etsy and I found this. It wasn't a rainbow, but it was this stained glass piece, beautiful, that was like it was called the rain catcher or rainbow catcher. So I purchased it. I told this person that, this is the reason. Can you ship it early? She said yes. Long story short, never got shipped.
Ah.
Right? Email after email, never shipped it. And now I'm mad. Now I'm upset. So like, okay, that doesn't look so hard to make. Like, not only am I gonna make that, but then I'm gonna start an Etsy business that competes with her. So my friend Leo calls it revenge art.
Yeah.
So just to know, I never went as far as getting the revenge and starting an Etsy. But what it got me to do is I took the picture and I emailed a couple stained glass stores around here, and I'm like, do you teach classes and can I make this after a class? And the place we went to said, yes, you can make that after a series of classes. So I went and took a stained glass making class. It was 4 weeks long. And for revenge, so start as
My
revenge.
best. Yeah.
And by the end, I was so infatuated with this art form. I bought everything. Like everything that I needed to have a little stained glass studio in my backyard, I bought it. And now that's what I'm thinking for the farm too. Like my future is a farm with many animals, a ton of rescue dogs, and a barn for stained glass and arts and crafts.
I love that you said rescue dogs because that would be my blue sky. So, like, if I win the lottery or I come into like a bunch of cash in some way, shape, or form, I naturally tend to go to like a private island that I would have like Dog Island, and there'd be a sign that said like dogs welcome, humans tolerated, and then just have dogs living their best lives everywhere. Because I've got two rescues, and anytime I'm around dogs or working with rescues, it's so hard not to take all of them.
I am right there with you. That's how come I feel like you've had to shut your 2 dogs out of the room so they're quiet. I've got 4 roaming around here somewhere. Yes, I am right there. And that's the other thing too. It's like I think you need to live that dream because it's been with you forever.
Yeah.
Yep.
I manifested, I see it. I'm always open to how it's gonna pop up in some way, shape, or form. But I mean,
Yeah.
especially when you see what they go through, I think it's dogs are so magical in a sense of a lot of them of what they've been through and their ability to again get knocked down, come back up in whatever shape or form that's happened multiple times. They're ability to unconditionally love regardless
Yes,
of how awful people or instances have been for them. And I think that
absolutely.
every time I'm around dogs, you always just learn something. Like, nobody's ever going to be as excited to see you as your dog. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
never.
If you can match that, I want to know them.
And their energy, so I mean, their personalities, their energy, so I have this one dog, his name's Nugget, so he's a giant 85-pound, I think he's a black lab Catahoula hound, and he senses energy, like, I have a 12-year-old son who's calmer now, but when he was younger and he would have these meltdowns, Nugget would just leave and go as far away as possible to another room, right? As far on the opposite side of the house as possible. So they feel this energy from you, and it's just like they're just like they are really magical little beings.
Yeah, I've had my first dog. She's, oh, what is she? Almost like 8 years old now. I rescued her when she was a year. And when I was going through a very turbulent relationship and in moments where I was like on the ground, fetal position, crying, she would always just like come right in and just like rest. And her paws would be on my chest. And it was just like that little piece of like, you are going to be okay. And just like
That's so
curl into
sweet.
me. So you always just, I don't know. Dogs are just the
Yeah,
best.
they
Emotional
are
support
special.
animals without the official paperwork to
Title,
get on
right.
planes, I guess, which I'm thinking
Right.
about for both of them because I would never wanna put them underneath a plane, but I love it. And so, what's the biggest thing kinda coming up for you now that, like, lights you up outside of the farm with the mini animals, making mosaics? What's the thing
Yeah.
that's kinda getting you out of bed excited?
So I've been running this business for 10 years and it's been me. Everything has been me. And other than like, bringing in other facilitators and when needed and when I'm going to co-facilitate, but I really feel like now, and at first I looked at this and like, oh, like why haven't I scaled this business over the past 10 years? Like, oh, maybe because I was raising a child too, who's now 12. So that was always my priority. The business was my second priority. And now my son's at an age where he doesn't need me as much. I'm like, okay, so this is the right time for me to start thinking about like, how do I scale this business? And number one, because to be clearly more financially successful and to get this company to grow. But in thinking about it just recently, I was like, oh, you know what? The way my mom started this manicure, or I should say pioneered this manicure industry, I talk about usually around this concept of curiosity and creativity. But really what it did, I was talking to someone the other day about this idea of like it democratized getting manicures, right? Back then it was for the elite, movie stars, the wealthy, and making it available to everyone. And that's something that I just started recently thinking like, okay, this concept of creative leadership, these creative problem solving tools. Right now, the only way is really getting out to people through my work is if your company happens to value this and if they happen to be able to invest a certain amount of money to bring me in to talk to a group of you. That's how people get access to my work other than what I put on LinkedIn and YouTube. So I was thinking the next thing I'm working on right now, I'm launching in June, is a creative problem solving toolbox, a digital toolbox for leaders, for meeting planners, for facilitators. So everyone would be like, so it's just gonna be a toolbox. I picture like little thumbnails of the tools I use in my work.
Right.
Right. So if you're running a meeting and you're just like, okay, we have to come up with a solution to this challenge today, I can go in this toolbox. I'm like, oh, I'm going to use this tool, the like how might we statements, or I'm going to combine that tool with this tool and create my framework for this facilitation using this toolbox. And I thought about, I'm like, that's a really interesting way to again, continue my mom's legacy in a way of democratizing something that's not available and make it readily available.
I love it. And so you said that's coming out in June, so that's very
Yes.
exciting. Cool. Well, I would love to kind of go into sort of rapid fire questions that kind of tell us a little bit more about you and maybe again deeper into your psyche and all the fun things that kind of make you who you are. So, what are either some of your personal tools or habits that you kind of use daily to like keep you grounded or if you're going through moments where life is just not peachy keen, what do you use to kind of pull yourself back up to where you want to be?
There's several dog walks.
Yeah, very important.
I
Yeah.
love my dog walks. I've got plenty of dogs to walk, so that's never a problem. And I learned a while ago from a business coach this idea of reframing tool. And because I do, being someone who's always like growing up trying to please people, that's still there, right? It's still there. And I still have those moments of, was that good enough? Did I offend that person? And I can start ruminating. So something she taught me was when you feel that in your body, right? When you start thinking that, use this reframing tool. It's like, okay, literally just take a piece of paper, 3 columns, write down the situation, right? Write down the situation and how you're thinking about it and see how that feels to you. And usually it's a lot of like anxiety. And then she said, just reframe it, right? Like, write what else it could mean. Right. It's like, oh, that person maybe have been too busy to answer my email. Right. And so really just like this idea of just rather than ruminating on the way you're thinking, how can you just change your thoughts to be something more empowering? So that's another tool I often use. And then in terms of habits, what I have found is that, again, this is something that's recently come up for me. Is like I'm really good at keeping my commitments to other people, but not to myself.
Yeah.
Right. And I also tend to overschedule because I was talking to a business coach and he's saying, okay, so what are you going to commit to yourself? Like, okay, I'm commit up to waking up every day, doing a gratitude journal, working out for 15 minutes. He's like, that's 7 things. Like, you just told me you find it hard to commit to yourself. So what's the one thing? And the one thing I've started doing is like waking up, feed the dog, going outside, taking 10 breaths, no matter how cold it is, feed the dogs, and then do a workout. No matter when I say workout, I use that very loose. Like today, I'm like, I did a mobility class for 15 minutes, right? But something where I'm just committing to myself to move my body and listening to my body for what it needs that day.
And that's where I think the biggest thing, or anytime when I'm kind of working with different teams, you can see, right away, people who are naturally kind of, sort of built for it and know what to do very quickly and like kind of optimize their performance versus taking everything in and kind of, I'll call it the bending till we break. And it's like, well, what are the things that you have to do every day, ongoing, consistently? That's going to
Yes.
allow you to handle like whether it's stress better or how you show up in a team dynamic. It is so powerful. And for me, like working out has always been the thing. It's if I'm having a problem that's stuck in my head I can't solve, work out. Like I can reframe it or I can work through it or I'll have the solution because I've just gotten out of that space and just found a different release that allows me to like let that go from my body. But I recognize the symptoms where I'll feel my shoulders start to go up to my
Right.
ears, my breath gets shorter instead of like longer and calm. Like, okay, like we need to just take a pause for a moment.
And getting the anxiety out of your body, right? So this idea of like anxiety is in your head, it really starts as a physical feeling. So to exercise or to do something active to actually get that anxiety out of your body, I think is important.
Yeah, and recognizing a lot of people, it's really interesting when you like ask a question like, what is happening in your body right now? A lot of people can't answer that question because they're so out
Yeah.
of tune with like recognizing what's changed. And especially if they're in that constant state of stress, understanding like what it's like to not feel that way. Some people have no idea what that feels like to not have that tension in their body, which is really interesting working with teams as well. You mentioned your mom. Talk to me about kind of mentors throughout your like life thus far that have been really impactful or influential in terms of how you've been able to navigate and or start different ventures.
When people ask me, like, I don't have like that one person, like, oh, this is the person. I feel like I have a lot of, what do you call it, like informal mentors.
Yeah.
And they kind of like pop in and out of my life. Like I was talking about that one business coach who really became like almost a life coach to me, right? She really was so helpful in helping me see the way I think and the limiting thoughts I have
Yeah.
and to try to help me break free of those. And I would say a lot of my friends, right? Like let's talk about Nancy Gale, right? Like I don't think she would consider herself my mentor, but honestly, I think of Nancy every time I want to have like one of my low moments, like Nancy, right?
Yeah. Call direct sunshine to
That's
help you
right.
out for sure.
That's right.
Yeah. And I think sometimes people get stuck on that you have to have one big one, but I think sometimes like in different eras or evolutions of yourself, you kind of, as long as you're open to it and to receive it, there's different people that come up and then they're either kind of with you for all the different iterations of you, or they're just there for that one to kind of kickstart you into the next one, which I always think is really interesting. Is there any, I'll call it, you talked about reframing, any other maybe either like statements or moments or anything that somebody has said to you that was like switch?
Yeah. I would say there's a few. So there was a book I read when I first started my business called The Prosperous Coach. I remember 2 things from that book that really kind of kept me going. Number one was this concept of just start and keep going, right? Start and keep going. The other one was the right people will show up, right? And I guess that's three, because then there's another one about what was the other one that they say in there? Well, another one in general is I've been listening to this podcast. His name is David Guyam, and he talks about Kabbalah. But one of the things that he talks about is this certainty, right? There's power in certainty. So even if you look at your reality today and it's not your vision, like be certain that that vision is possible. Right. And then just and it's almost like when I write a book and take those small steps. You can't just envision it and then hope it comes true. Like, what actions are you taking towards that vision? But I just love that idea. I go walk around with my dogs and like, I'm just certain. I'm just certain I'm going to be walking a mini cow one day.
I'm certain of that too, and I can't wait to also walk a mini cow with you one day. I want all the minis. I want like a leash with
All the
all
minis.
different
That's
ones.
right.
I love
Well,
it.
so I can see it. We'll be on the farm. We'll walk the mini animals. We'll go do some mosaic in the mosaic area and do some stained glass making.
Rescue some dogs potentially on our
Yep,
mission.
absolutely.
I love it. What advice would you give to somebody who is maybe hesitant to pursue their curiosity?
This is advice I know is not easy, right? Because again, the business took me 6 years to start. The book took me 4 years to start. So even with practice, it's hard. But I would say to take the first small step, right? If you've got that curiosity, just whatever, even if it's Googling something about it, just take the small step, because it's never going to happen if it just stays in your head, right? So put some action to whatever that curiosity is.
Yeah. I always think that's the biggest piece, just digestible steps. It doesn't have to be massive, just that like one foot in front of the other approach. And eventually you kind of get to where you start to feel that momentum or a little bit more. I think it's like safety in that path that a lot of people are looking for. And then last question, in your own words, define what built for this means to you.
Built for this. Okay, so I saw that question. I don't think I prepared for that. So
It's better that it's just, from the heart.
got it. So in line with curiosity, I think we are each built for something different, right? So I feel like I have found what I am built for, built for this, I am built for this, the work I'm doing now. So I think it's a different definition for each person. And I think, in terms of like the definition of success, I would say the same thing. It's like built for this is the definition of success is finding what you are built for.
I love it. It's my favorite question to ask, actually, because now that we've recorded a few episodes and hearing everybody's interpretation of it, it kind of comes back to like everybody has a different way. And those like little nuggets along the way that you hear, I think provides people with the like, oh, I can do this if
Oh,
they're
yeah,
kind of in that moment.
absolutely.
I love it. All right. So thank you for coming on. I'm so excited we got
Thank
to
you,
jump in
Jenna.
and do all things curiosity and explore creative avenues. And last but not least, before we close things off, if people have heard something that resonates for them today and they want to get in touch with you or understand your work at a deeper level, what is the best way to connect with you?
You can always email me. I respond to all my emails. Maybe not timely, but I do. It's VAN@worksmartadvantage.com. And if you just want to come and see the work I do, LinkedIn is always a great place. So just find me on LinkedIn. I post basically every day. I joke that LinkedIn is my second home until I get that farm. But yeah, I'm on LinkedIn all the time. So please connect with me on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Well, thank you. And stay tuned for another episode of Built for This.
Thanks, Jenna.
Thanks.